Cheapside, Bradford, at the turn of the century. Among the 38 million in Britain, there is a sense of a new beginning.
The year 1900 is really the first modern celebration of a centenary. It's the first time that people were fully aware that a new century was going to be a new age. A remarkably large number of people in 1900 knew where they were going. They had a clear vision of the new age.
In many ways, they had more progressive energy than we do now. There was more of a sense, I think, of optimism in 1900 that poverty could eventually be eradicated, that it was important to raise the standards of living of the people at the bottom of the heap, that in the end there would be a cleaner, more righteous world to be created.
I loved it. I loved it. We had ink wells on the top class and ink, pen and ink. Nibs, you know the nibs, you wouldn't know them. Oh, that is to say she's only 10, you know. Oh, well, let her come and try. I did, that was the beginning. I was happy, oh, I was happy, filling their ink pots.
The new world that Annie Coleman is beginning to discover is for the first time being caught on film. Everyday sights are transformed by the lens.
There were all the evils, as it were, of imperialism and racism, extreme racism, rife, anti-Semitism and so on. Nonetheless, there was this rather attractive silver stream of optimism running through life, which we don't have now.
In 1900, the British Empire is at its height. Queen Victoria governs 1 in 5 people on the planet. Britain's control of coal, iron and steam underpins its economic power through trade. It launches 2/3 of the world's new ships. British factories make high profits, converting imported raw materials into new products for worldwide distribution.
The word new was one of the favourite words of the time. It was used all over the place, as it is now. New woman, new art, new morality. Everything was new.
Motor cars are new. Fears about their excessive speed abound.
People were more excited by the new technologies than terrified of them. Nearly everybody who was asked what is going to be the great thing in science and technology, they nearly all said electricity.
The new source of power promises to relieve not just the dark, but even aches and pains. Electricity is a symbol of new vitality.
In 1900, it was perfectly possible to think that the world was just going to go on getting better and better and better.
At the beginning of the year, the celebratory mood is dampened by losses in the war against the Boers. In a period of 8 days, over 1,000 soldiers die. General Roberts is sent to South Africa with Kitchener to take over command. In the major cities, a flu epidemic rages. 50 Londoners succumb every day. Childhood was risky for the century's newborn, like Florence Parsons.
Florence Parsons, my name, that's all I had. And 1st of the 1st, 1900. That's when I was born. But what time, I couldn't tell you. There was 4 of us, and I was the youngest then, sort of baby, I suppose. Dad drove this little pony and trap until he was ill. Then of course, he died. There wasn't much family life after that.
The recent raising of the school leaving age to 14 saved many children from virtual slave labour.
When we were sitting in the classroom, one could see the children coming down a hill to come to school. And if they were late, they'd be running down the hill, not to be late. Because if they were late, they got smacked with a cane.
Growing state intervention in family life brings large numbers of children into schools for the first time.
There was a big gallery one end and the desks the other. I'd put IE instead of EI in one of the words. And the teacher had said, anybody with more than 4 mistakes should have the cane. And I thought, oh heavens. And then I began to cry. The headmistress said, I can't cane these girls for that. My 3 pals were so glad that I was first, because you see, she didn't want to cane me. She knew father.
February brings better news from the war in South Africa. Ladysmith is relieved from siege. The Grand Theatre in Islington burns down, rudely interrupting a pantomime, The 40 Thieves. India is gripped by famine. A relief fund is set up. But in Britain, almost 1 in every 6 children is still dying in their first year. Disease and poor diet are rife.
There was an enormous amount of poverty throughout the whole Victorian reign. And there was an increasing interest in how much of it there was in the 1880s and 1890s. How many poor people were there really in the country?
Cities are growing at unprecedented rates. Mass influx from the country results in enormous pressure on housing. There are daily evictions from the slums in Southwark.
One family have been moved 4 times. On the last occasion, the children were taken away to the workhouse. George Sims, Living London magazine.
To find out the true situation, the radical Charles Booth carries out a survey of the poor in London. He colour codes his maps to show the class of the occupants. Yellow or gold for the well-off, through to black for the lowest class, or in his eyes, the vicious semi-criminal. His unexpected finding is that fully 1/3 of the population live in desperate straits. A survey in York shocks people still further. Similar poverty exists in the provinces. On the continent, such poverty had sparked revolutions.
Democracy was then, is now, a profoundly ambiguous term. It's the rule of the majority, inevitably uneducated, alienated, dispossessed, over the rich, the intelligent, the cultivated. Mass politics. Now, the Victorians knew what revolutions had led to. Many of the upper class, the most politically astute, are coming to doubt their right to rule, their moral authority. there's a rumble, not of revolution, but of retreat by the ruling class on moral grounds.
In 1900, the Conservatives are in power, led by Robert Cecil, Lord Salisbury. He described the advance of mass politics as
interference with the free play of economic forces by socialists who wanted to nationalize property and anarchists who wanted to destroy it. The rumble was different, but it spoke with one voice: change.
Although the Liberals are the official opposition, the New Left are organising. At the Memorial Hall in Farringdon Street, the Labour Representation Committee was set up. It was Labour's answer to the Federation of Masters and Trusts.
It brought together different ingredients of what now has become the Labour Party. The trade unions, who had been resistant for a long time to the idea of separate Labour representation. The Independent Labour Party was there, which Keir Hardie was associated with, and which had grown very strongly in the north. The Fabians were there. They played no part, actually, because Fabians believed you permeated these organisations. And the Social Democratic Federation was there, which was a socialist organisation believing in the class war.
One of the delegates, John Burns, doesn't believe in the class war.
We want no working class boots, working class trains and working class margarine. We should not be prisoner to class prejudice.
The meeting rejects the class war strategy, but agrees to endorse socialist ideas.
In more recent years, socialists have been driven out of the party, and far more emphasis is given on working with the Liberals, which was rejected in 1900 as not being in the interests of working people.
The war in South Africa is causing a massive deficit. The Conservative Colonial Secretary, Chamberlain, is held up to ridicule. A blaze at Buckingham Palace summons the fire brigade.
Made for the Gramophone and Typewriter Company Limited, London, and the Associated Company.
The newly formed Gramophone Company advertises for the first time with Nipper the dog listening to a record. Nipper's master, the painter Francis Barrault, originally painted the picture for the rival Edison Company. He wrote,
We had a phonograph, and I often noticed how puzzled Nipper was to make out where the voice came from. It suddenly occurred to me to have my dog listening to the phonograph with an intelligent and rather puzzled expression and call it his master's voice.
The Edison Company doesn't want the picture, so Barrow hauls it around to the Gramophone Company, who are delighted, especially by the slogan, his master's voice. Barrow has to paint out the recording machine and insert a brand new gramophone player. This obliterates the original idea of a hound listening to his owner, but the notion is so compelling that it becomes one of the new century's enduring trademarks.
Animal imitation by Mr. Harry Carsdale. King. Dog being hit by a man.
In March, too, the Pope celebrates his 90th birthday. The true icons of the New Age are advertising billboards, celebrating a new religion, consumerism.
One of the biggest new changes of the late 19th century into the 20th century was the discovery and development of soap. And people were beginning to be cleaner for the first time. In the middle years of the century, the great entrepreneurs had been associated with heavy industry. Now they're associated with consumption and changing people's shopping habits. There were even soap wars.
Manufacturers turn from satisfying needs to creating hitherto unsuspected desires. Queen Victoria appears on all sorts of household items without permission or approval. There are no rules. The whole of the royal family, including princes and future kings, polish boots with berries blacking. Queen Victoria looks on.
Heavy boots, I had to wear boots. Father says I wasn't to wear shoes. He wanted my ankles to grow properly. So I had to have boots. The dresses then were quite long down to your ankles and made of well good cloth, and over it we wore hot pinafores. But I was very proud of my pinafores because they were made of very fine holland with torchon lace all the way round. And nobody in the class had a prettier pinafore than I did, because Auntie made it for me. I was a proud little thing, wasn't I? When you think what we got underneath it.
In April, the Paris International Exhibition opens to wide acclaim. The moving pavement is a first and astonishes the world. An attempt is made on the life of the Prince of Wales in a Belgian railway station. The young assassin is believed to be an anarchist. The mystic Aleister Crowley brawls with the poet W.B. Yeats for control of the Temple of the Golden Dawn in Hammersmith. Queen Victoria visits Dublin for the first time in her reign. Her trip is reported on the front page of a new halfpenny newspaper, Pearson's Daily Express.
The Daily Express was begun April the 24th, 1900, by Arthur Pearson. And he was a sort of middling middle class. His father was a curate in Bedfordshire. They were fairly hard up. And he entered a competition in Titbits. Titbits was a great popular magazine of the day. And this competition was a sort of general knowledge competition, and you had to answer 130 questions. And the prize was a job on Titbits. Lots of them he couldn't answer. So he got on his bike, as all good Tories should do, and he went 30-odd miles to Bedford, the nearest public library. And he answered the questions. And he won the competition.
Pearson got the job and rapidly advanced in an expanding industry. He first created Pearson's Weekly, and by 1900 was looking for a new venture.
His deadly rival, Alfred Harmsworth, had begun the Daily Mail in 1896. It was selling 1 million copies a day. And Arthur Pearson was so jealous and furious, he began the Daily Express. And he began it with the sole purpose of grabbing readers from the Daily Mail. And nothing has changed in 100 years. They're still battling it out.
Father had a newspaper. We were not supposed to see the newspaper, but we did when we had a chance. My brothers could read and tell me what was in it. Not supposed to, but so I did know quite a lot one way and another. Father was very strict about his paper. The Daily Mail. Still going strong, isn't it?
In May, the filmmaker Cecil Hepworth travels to Algeria to capture a total eclipse. The film is now lost. The Illustrated London News carries a drawing. Mount Vesuvius erupts. Britain's first automobile speed trial is held at Welbeck Abbey. It is Queen Victoria's 81st birthday.
Queen Victoria said firmly, "I shall never be the queen of a democracy." She wasn't amused, but of course she'd no choice. The really clever people in her entourage knew that the next age was to be an age of real democracy. As always, the most interesting people are those just off stage. People like Reginald Brett, Viscount Esher, then a quite obscure backroom figure, Constable of Windsor Castle, the string puller par excellence. Esher was a man of the most complex personal morality, married with children, but a series of crushes on Eton sixth formers, and finally a passionate relationship with his own second son. And he's the man who invents the modern monarchy. But Esher knew about democracy. If the monarchy was to survive into the new age, it had to go popular, it even had to go populist. What is happening in these years round 1900 is that you invent modern royal ceremony. And the reason why British royal ceremony looks a kind of vulgar cross between Hollywood and Ruritania is that that's what it was designed to be, to rival the great popular theatre of varieties. Just as the cinema is coming in, there's a shift in popular theatre. You get great, massive theatres. You get huge spectaculars. Royal ceremony, with its horses and its marching bands and its men in exotic uniforms, is a kind of royal theatre of varieties. To appeal to the new masters of Britain, the people.
The monarchy reinvents itself as the royal family. However, the Prince of Wales is still uncrowned at 60. His life is a round of house parties. He entertains favourites like Mrs. Alice Keppel.
Inevitably, all self-consciously moral ages are hypocritical. No one was less moral than Victoria's eldest son. There are, in fact, some very interesting parallels between the position of the royal family in the 1890s and the royal family in the 1990s. There's the delicious personal link between the Prince of Wales, then, later on Edward VII, his mistress, Alice Keppel, and, of course, the mistress of the current Prince of Wales, Camilla Parker Bowles. Mrs. Keppel is great-grandmother of Camilla Parker Bowles. And yet the women of the royal family at the end of the 19th century in many ways are much more honest, much more supportive. They frankly say to Alexander, "I'm sorry, he's a womanizer." They're supportive. They carry her through. They were aware, in a way that we are not, of the inevitable gaps between public and private.
On May the 15th, Mafeking is relieved. Overnight, Colonel Baden-Powell is a hero.
By 11 o'clock, London's traffic was at a standstill as groups of men, women and children danced up and down.
We had a great day. The Fire Brigade came out and the Salvation Army and marched up through the town. And one lot made themselves black. Wonderful.
In Anne's hometown of Alton in Hampshire, the celebrations last 2 days.
I was a very quiet little girl and had to stand by my auntie. And some naughty boys started putting off, oh, you wouldn't know, little crackers, jumping crackers, and scared me stiff.
In June, there is a disastrous train crash in Slough. 5 people are killed, 70 injured. Lord Roberts occupies Pretoria. An end to the South African War seems in sight. In China, the Boxer Rebellion breaks out. Enraged at Christian missionaries, nationalist rebels create havoc. The secret society of Boxers slaughters a whole Chinese Catholic congregation. For the first time, Britain joins with other European powers and America to fight in China, because her forces are overcommitted in South Africa. The Boer War is the first war to be recorded on film. Cameramen are restricted in their coverage and kept away from the front line. So frustrated are they that they set up scenes. In the background, hundreds of troops watch this supposed attack. To compensate for the lack of real action, fakes are made in Britain.
The fake films were made very largely in places like Hampstead Heath, using professional actors. They were very simple-minded. They never lasted very long. They were two minutes at most. And they were highly patriotic. They tended to depict Boer atrocities, Boers doing dreadful things to English nurses and this sort of thing. They were entertainment.
Gramophone recordings are made of mock battles. Magazines celebrate the British fighting spirit. But a shortage of troops leads to a recruitment campaign. Soon, conscription will be brought in. The Fabians, among them the recent founders of the London School of Economics, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, opposed the war on moral grounds. Ironically, Beatrice Webb had almost married the chief architect of the war, Joseph Chamberlain, the colonial secretary.
Sidney Webb said that nothing ever happens in Britain without being set in train by the upper 2,000 who live in London. The leading socialists, the leading conservatives and the leading liberals at each other's throats in Parliament or on the public platform were nevertheless often intermarried, stayed at each other's houses and moved within a coherent social public sphere.
In July, the Zeppelin airship takes to the air for the first time. The Minoan city of Knossos in Crete is discovered by the archaeologist Arthur Evans. King Humbert of Italy is assassinated whilst on holiday by an anarchist. As the summer of 1900 progresses, the public are entertained by the novelty of motion pictures.
One of the great similarities between moving pictures in 1900 and moving pictures in 2000 is the fact that they were shown in many different places, in many different contexts. You'd see moving pictures in the programme at the music hall. You'd see them in touring exhibitors. You'd come to the local church hall or to the local town hall or to the Corn Exchange. You'd see them in what were called shop shows, where a shop would be taken on a short lease and they'd block out the glass window and they'd project images onto the back wall inside, put a few chairs up, have a very short show. You'd see them when the fairground came to town in movable, portable shows. The context in which you see moving pictures isn't fixed. The type of moving pictures you see isn't fixed either.
Advertising, comic sketches, news and drama are all filmed. Some pundits dismiss the new medium as a passing fad. Others put money into an illustrated newspaper for the home.
One of the investors in this scheme was the owner of the Daily Express, Arthur Pearson. The idea of cross-investment into one industry from another is as common in 1900 as it is in the year 2000.
The forerunners of erotic videos are shown in men's smoking rooms. Many of the films are specially made in France. Football is already a popular sport, but not everyone can afford the gate fee.
When we went to football, they'd open the gates for people that want to come out early. And we used to be waiting there, waiting until the door opened and burst in to go and watch the last 20 minutes. 3-3.
Football is already a professional game in 1900, but northern teams dominate. In July, a new name emerges from the south, a works team.
The works was called Thames Iron Works, and they were a shipyard on the Thames down the river in the East End. And the owner of this factory was a man called Arnold Hills. He'd gone to Harrow and Oxford. He played football for England, and he owned the factory. He opened a sports complex for the workers in about 1895, and he had a racing track, and he had a football team. By 1900, they become so organised, Arnold Hills decided there should be more than a works team. So in July 1900, West Ham FC was created. They were a very well organised team, and they were so well organised they were fined something like £25 by the FA in the late 1890s for tempting away players under the counter. Bungs and fiddles were just as strong as they are today. And I always assumed that West Ham United were known as the Hammers because of the word ham. But it's got no connection with West Ham. It came from Thames Iron Works because their coat of arms and their logo was a crossed pair of riveting hammers. To this day, they're still called the Hammers.
In August, Coca-Cola goes on sale in Britain. In China, the Allies storm the walls of Peking. Workers striking for better conditions shut down the Taff Vale Railway. A court judgment imposes damages. An unexpected blow for the unions. In industrial Lancashire, the filmmaking partnership of Sagar Mitchell and James Kenyon record local events, putting on shows for the public. Never before seen on television, their films document life in the North and Midlands as the century turns. Among their specialities are phantom tram rides. A camera mounted on the front of a tram weaves through the streets. In Nottinghamshire, the stagecoach still plies between major towns. Here, James Kenyon approaches women in the street and asks them to walk past for the camera. As he turns to board the tram, the camera catches his face. Seconds later, the women pass through the picture as if by chance. One of the scenes that Mitchell and Kenyon film again and again is a shift leaving a factory. The idea is that on Saturday night, the workers will come to see themselves on the big screen. These drays are delivering from Nuttall's Brewery in Blackburn. Religious campaigners warn unceasingly of the evils of the demon drink. This parade in Ashton, Manchester, encourages folk to buy bread instead of beer. Food takes a large part of the family budget.
No meat of any description. Oh, at that time, the butcher's shops were open until 12 o'clock at midnight on Saturday nights. And the women used to go at midnight, and they could have as many bones as they could carry. And there the women going home, almost weighted down with bones free, given them free.
Waiting for the bones at home, Stanley's father is ready with a stew of herbs, carrots and turnips. He adds the bones and waits till 1 o'clock until it is cooked and ready.
He had a small mug, and he used to fill that mug, sit me on his knee, and he'd make me drink it. He'd make me, and he'd drink it, then he'd take me back to bed again. And he used to do that, he did that right up to being 5 or 6 years old.
In September, Lord Roberts proclaims the annexation of the Transvaal. Parts of the press hail this prematurely as victory. The Conservative government dissolves Parliament and calls a quick election. It'll be a vote of confidence about the war. The nation is obsessed with crime. Music hall sketches enact street robberies. Every month, the Strand magazine features the fiction of Arthur Conan Doyle. In September, a crime straight from the pages of a Sherlock Holmes mystery takes place in Yarmouth. A young woman is found strangled on the beach with a bootlace. Nobody knows who she is. A snap taken by a beach photographer turns up in a drawer in her lodgings. Circulated widely, it is finally recognized in her hometown of Bexley Heath. Her name is Bennett. Her husband, who has gone off with another woman, becomes the chief suspect. He has motive and opportunity. Furthermore, a chain found in his possession seems to match the holiday snap. Bennett is condemned and hanged. It is the first case in criminal law in which guilt or innocence turns on a photograph. In fact, crime rates are the lowest in Europe.
Visitors from the continent constantly comment on how peaceful and law-abiding it was. What many criminologists see as one of the sort of main sources of criminality in any society is untutored male aggression. The empire took the lid off what might otherwise have been a very tightly closed, buttoned-up, explosive society.
In October, the interpretation of dreams is published by Sigmund Freud. He has delayed for almost a year, fearing a hostile reaction to his advanced ideas of psychology. In the khaki election, the Conservatives gamble on a wave of enthusiasm for the war. Their bet pays off. The first swingometer registers victory. What difference the new government will make is less clear. It is traffic jams, as usual, for the man on the Clapham omnibus. A bride and groom have a cab accident in High Holborn. A scene captured by Paul Martin, the instigator of a new kind of photography. Martin's subjects are unposed. The candid picture. Using a camera called the Facile, disguised as a brown paper parcel, he captures moments that are beyond the formal photography of the time. In November, the Paris International Exhibition closes. Oscar Wilde dies in the same city, a broken man. On November the 1st, Bernard Shaw is elected to the newly formed Borough Council of St Pancras in London. He serves on the Health Committee, among others.
We were as ignorantly helpless politically as the mob of ratepayers who elected us, and who would never have elected me had they had the faintest suspicion of my intimate political views.
Shaw is constantly at odds with the Conservative view on topics such as
the unmentionable question of sanitary accommodation, entrance to which traditionally costs 1 penny, an absolutely prohibitive charge for a poor woman.
The battle for a free public lavatory on Camden High Street rages on. Some councillors object that it will be an inconvenience. When in committee, a particularly sexist remark about a pregnant woman provokes laughter, he retorts,
"If there were no other reason for giving women the vote, I would support it myself on no other grounds than that men will not behave themselves when women are not present."
Women denied the vote in the election, nevertheless canvass for candidates. The press views the prospect of women voting with alarm. Many women, too, oppose the vote.
What on earth would I want to vote for?
Male fears express themselves in humour. Suffragettes played by men in drag are lampooned. An anonymous poem betrays the rising tide of female impatience.
When we women claim the franchise, men have one answering note.
By reason of your womanhood, we do refuse the vote.
But when the tax collector calls, 'tis not enough to say, by reason of our womanhood, we do refuse to pay.
The declining birth rate leads to concern that female emancipation will weaken military defences. Education and mental effort are bad for women's health. This is the view of the new disciplines of gynecology and psychology. The casebook of the Holloway Sanatorium lists one woman as suffering from
hysteria and self-abuse. She masturbates freely. She also confesses to attacks of excitement. They test to see if she has hysterogenic zones.
A 21-year-old gay man is also confined. He
discusses his sexual feelings without the slightest regard for decency. He is weak-minded and given to laughing without any apparent cause.
By the end of his treatment,
still refusing food, will not sit down or stay in bed, but insists on standing bolt upright in one place.
Mummy had to be taken away because her brain went. Every Saturday, Father would put his best suit on and go by train somewhere near Winchester to visit her. And I know when I heard him, this key in the door, I'd run out and say, have you brought Mummy home? And of course he had to say, she's not well enough. And then one day, Mummy will never come back again. That was the end of Mummy.
In December, Max Planck discovers quantum theory. The War Office confirms 11,000 deaths in the Boer War. 2/3 of those are from dysentery and enteric fever.
I don't think there was very much optimism at the end of the year 1900. The Times published a poem on December the 31st, in which it talked of a year of smoke, when the cannons spoke. The Boer War went on, and as it went on, it began to be a rather unpleasant war, a guerrilla war, as we would now call it, and a war of concentration camps.
Tories are still in power in 1900, but there is a massive, crushing defeat for them just a few years away. If you look at progressive politics, you see a lot of parallels with New Labour now. And indeed, Tony Blair is an active and close student of the politics of the early part of the century, where, in his view, you have a progressive form of politics which isn't socialist.
Cosmo Gordon Lang, the man who was going to become Archbishop, part of the real inner circle, he said, we're ending the century of production. We're beginning the century of redistribution. Now that is not a bad forecast for the 20th century. They knew where they were going. We don't. They knew by and large how they were going to get there. We don't. They knew that they were into the age of mass democracy. We know that we're going into the third way.
Some of the rising tensions which are going to become crises are again very contemporary. With the suffragettes, you have the rise of sexual politics. Communications are faster. The world seems smaller and smaller in the same way that the world is being knitted together again by the internet. You have the tabloid, very, very populist, rather crude, rather aggressive journalism, which is worrying the elite. Right across the board, I think, you have a series of fascinating parallels. In many ways, the world in which we live in today is the same world that they were living in then. It was being shaped then.
On the last night of 1900, a gale blows down stones at Stonehenge. Fragments are hurled over 81 feet. It is decided to fence Stonehenge off and charge admission. The 20th century has really begun. 3 weeks later, Queen Victoria is dead. Her passing is the final sign that one age is ending and a new one is dawning.
Next week we reflect more on the past, and this time we travel across the Atlantic to an American 1900, next Saturday at the earlier time at 7 o'clock. Stay with 4 for a mixture of animation, music